March 17, 1973, Solano County, California. Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Stirm is released after spending nearly 6 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. His 4 children and wife greet him at Travis Air Force Base. But what's the story behind this Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph? In this behind-the-frame video, we explore the complex and harrowing experiences of American soldiers who became prisoners of war during the Vietnam War. Discover the emotional and psychological challenges they faced, as well as the profound impact on their families back at home, many of whom spent years living in uncertainty and fear. The photograph of Lieutenant Colonel Stirm's reunion captures a joyful moment, but behind it lies the harsh reality faced by American POWs in Vietnam. To fully understand the emotional weight of his return, we must first examine the struggles and sacrifices of those who endured captivity. What is often left out of such reunion photographs is the broader context of what these soldiers and their families endured during the war, the brutality of the POW experience, and how the war changed them forever. The struggle of American POWs in Vietnam. Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Stirm, a 31-year-old US Air Force pilot, was captured on the 26th of September 1967 after his F-105 Thunder Chief was shot down during a bombing mission over North Vietnam. At the time of his capture, Stirm was serving in the Pacific Air Forces. He was taken to Hoa Lo Prison, famously known as the Hanoi Hilton, a notorious facility where many American POWs were subjected to physical and mental torture. For nearly 6 years, Stirm endured the brutality of North Vietnamese prison camps. The POWs were often starved, beaten, and forced to endure extreme psychological stress. They lived in squalid conditions with little access to medical care and no contact with the outside world. Solitary confinement was common, a form of punishment that had devastating effects on many prisoners. It isolated them from their comrades and deprived them of any sense of time or hope. The physical torment was accompanied by psychological abuse. Many prisoners were subjected to forced confessions and propaganda, Stirm included. They were coerced into making false statements about their participation in the war, even though they knew these confessions would be used as tools of propaganda by the North Vietnamese government. These coerced confessions were broadcast across the world to manipulate public opinion. One of the most painful aspects of captivity for American POWs was the uncertainty of their situation. Prisoners would spend years without knowing whether they would see their families again. The uncertainty was not only physical, but emotional. Soldiers lived with the constant fear of death, torture, or being forgotten by their country. The family reunion. The signing of the Paris Peace Accords on the 27th of January 1973 led to a ceasefire and the eventual withdrawal of US troops from Vietnam. It was a pivotal moment in the war. For many families, it marked the beginning of hope, the possibility of their loved ones returning home. In the weeks following the signing, more than 600 American POWs were released in a series of flights to US military bases. Lieutenant Colonel Stirm was one of the first to return on March 17, 1973. As soon as the plane carrying the returning POWs touched down at Travis Air Force Base, an atmosphere of deep emotion filled the air. Soldiers were reunited with spouses, children, and loved ones. The long wait was finally over. What had been years of uncertainty turned into a moment of overwhelming joy. However, beneath the surface of this celebration lay a more complex and often painful reality. In that intense emotional moment, photographer Slava Veder captured an iconic image. Lieutenant Colonel Stirm with his arms open as his daughter Laurie leaped into his embrace. The joy and love of this reunion are clear in the faces of Stirm's family. His wife, Loretta, and their other children stand nearby, sharing in the emotional release of the moment. The photograph has become a powerful symbol of the sacrifices made by soldiers and the enduring strength of the American family unit. However, the emotional intensity of this photograph is laced with a tragic irony. While the reunion was celebrated as a triumph, the Stirm family's situation was more complicated than it may appear. During Stirm's captivity, his wife Loretta had written him a Dear John letter informing him that she wanted a divorce. This meant that while the photograph represented a moment of reunion, it was also followed by the painful reality of the emotional strain the war had placed on their marriage. How does this story connect with its historical context? The broader experience of American prisoners of war during the Vietnam War reveals the true extent of the suffering many soldiers endured. The war lasted from the mid-1960s to 1973. It saw many American soldiers captured during bombing raids, reconnaissance missions, or aerial combat. These men were often taken prisoner during some of the most intense and violent periods of the conflict. Conditions in North Vietnamese prisons were deplorable. Prisoners were often confined to overcrowded, dark and damp cells with little access to food, water or medical care. Torture and beatings were common as the North Vietnamese sought to extract confessions or information. For many prisoners, the emotional toll of being separated from their families, coupled with the constant fear of torture, led to profound psychological trauma. One of the most damaging aspects of being a POW in North Vietnam was the isolation. Many prisoners were kept in solitary confinement for months at a time, leading to severe mental distress. The lack of social interaction, the deprivation of basic human needs, and the uncertainty about their fate created a sense of hopelessness that affected many POWs long after they returned home. The threat of execution and the fear of being forgotten by their country weighed heavily on the minds of these men. After the Paris Peace Accords of 1973, more than 500 American POWs were brought back to the US in what was seen by many as the final chapter of the Vietnam War. Their return was a symbol of resilience and survival, a moment of collective celebration for families and the nation. However, the experiences of those who survived the camps were marked by deep emotional scars. Many POWs struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that had not yet been fully understood or recognized at the time. While their return to their families was welcomed with open arms, it was also complicated by the psychological scars that lingered. The reunions, like the one captured in Burst of Joy, were often bittersweet, moments of elation overshadowed by the deep mental and emotional toll that the war had left on these men. The psychological impact of their experiences was profound and affected not only the soldiers but their families as well. The legacy of Vietnam War POWs. The legacy of the Vietnam War POWs has been integral to the understanding of war's impact on individuals. Burst of Joy represents not only a moment of triumph and reunion, but also a painful acknowledgement of the suffering endured by American soldiers in Vietnam. It stands as a reminder of the emotional and psychological costs of war, not just for the individual soldiers who fought, but for our larger society. This photograph also highlights how war impacts families whose lives are often altered in profound and unexpected ways. The emotional toll on the families of POWs was significant, with many struggling to adapt to life after their loved ones returned. For some families, the reunion was not the end of their suffering, but the beginning of a long process of healing, something which for many continues to this day. The image of Stirm's reunion with his family remains a powerful symbol of the sacrifices made by soldiers and the endurance of those who faced unimaginable hardships. It serves as a reminder of the human cost of war, as well as the long-lasting effects that trauma can have on both the individuals who experience it and the families who support them through it. And that is the story behind the photograph Burst of Joy. On the 17th of March 1973, Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Stirm was reunited with his family after nearly 6 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. A Pulitzer Prize-winning image, but also a painful reminder of the sacrifices made by soldiers and the enduring emotional scars that war leaves on those who experience it.